Okay, good morning, everyone. We are live. It is Thursday, February 15th in Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. We have our sixth committee member today, Mira, and we are taking a bit of a departure from housing momentarily for another really critical topic that we'll take up in earnest again next week. But I think you all have been hearing about age appropriate design code, otherwise known as the KIDS code. And I just wanted to say a few things as we take up this bill because it is pretty monumental. It's a big deal that we're doing this. First and foremost, I just want to say that I think we all wake up and rely on products in our lives, the things we interact with, the things we consume to be safe. I put Mira in her car seat in the car. I got on roads. She has formula. I rolled her stroller up an ADA accessible ramp into the State House. So it's been a combination of, good actors and government making our lives safe and helping us, ensure that most importantly, our kids are safe. Our most vulnerable folks are safe. The ones who can't often speak up for themselves yet. Two, I just want to say that you don't have a copy of the bill on your desk. That is not necessarily by design. We can get it for you. We have a strike all new amended bill that we are putting on the table to begin with. And that's actually for a very exciting reason. We have Camille here, who's part of Center for Humane Technology. One of her partners in this work, Casey Mock, actually used to be our VEPSI director I'm looking at Anne to see if that rings a bell.
That does not ring a bell.
But so, a proud Vermonter at one time or another. And he was here about 2 weeks ago, I think, talking to our local tech businesses and making sure that they didn't feel somehow entangled in a bill that is really about Silicon Valley and our biggest tech companies. So there's some new draft language that really helps put them at ease. Senator Cummings.
This is the first, I've heard.
Yeah.
I know we are prohibited from regulating the internet. Do we have the power to do something to Silicon Valley?
The good news is we have lots of attorneys and smart people sitting around the table, advocates who have been working on this. And, that kind of leads to my next point, which is, we are certainly not alone in doing this. There is a big, we're in a David and Goliath situation, certainly. And at the same time, the UK has successfully regulated the code that our kids and families interact with, that everyone interacts with, to err on the side of privacy and safety. So the companies have already made that work in the UK. But I think we've heard for most of our lives, some of us, that, the internet simply can't be regulated, that it's something that we'll never quite understand, and the opaqueness is used against us to keep us from, ensuring that the internet is a safe place, and the code that underlies the platforms that we use are safe, especially for our kids. Many of us are close to being digital natives in the room. But, I grew up with AOL dial-up internet. My parents were worried about predators being on the internet, not the predator being the internet. And, we all grew up with ads and commercials that were targeted to kids, and
That we all still say.
yeah, right. Well,
How embedded is that?
and often when you get into the commercials for adolescents, it starts to prey on your anxieties and your lack of confidence and your isolation. And now, instead of just magazine ads and, commercials, they can reach through the page, they can reach through the screen, and they can follow our kids, where they're going, what they're buying, who they're interacting with. how isolated they feel, how they feel in general.
Pretend to be something and someone they aren't.
Exactly.
But I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
And I would like to regulate. I've
Mhm.
got 6 grandsons who are on,
Yes.
well, 2 that are extremely regulated.
Mhm.
Who regulates them?
Their parents. What I'm asking is this something we have the power to do, or are we just joining a national kind of push to make Congress do something because they're the ones who can regulate the internet?
The short answer is we are doing something that we have the power to do. That we are learning lessons from other states that have tried to go before us, like California, who have tried to do the same thing and have faced court challenges. And we actually have some of the attorneys joining us who have been involved in that to tell us why what we are doing is the next step in making sure that we can do what we are trying to do. Are we going to face challenges along the way? Sure. Our ledge council will come in next week and tell us what we have put forward as a sound piece of legislation that's perfectly within our right. And I guess I would just end by saying, hopefully to your point, Senator Cummings, that I don't have to understand the combustion engine in my car to make sure my baby's safe and has a seatbelt on. And that's what we're talking about here. We shouldn't have to understand the intricacies of the algorithms that are used and the data collected. It would be nice if we do, because it is getting pretty intense, and the acceleration of artificial intelligence into this set of algorithms and this code will only propel us into a future that's even more uncertain, especially for our kids. So while I think in the last wave of the sort of digital changes that we faced, we were told this genie's out of the bottle, there's nothing you can do. We can't accept that answer anymore. We have to understand what we're up against, and we have to protect our kids, especially from that, and protect their privacy and protect their mental well-being. So this is a youth mental health bill, probably the strongest one we'll be able to get through the legislature this year, because all of our children are on these platforms and are being sucked into these algorithms and further isolated. And it is our job to make sure that we hear them and that we protect them. And that's why I'm glad that we're taking this up. Yeah. Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, that was well taught. That's the youth of the future.
And to kick off our testimony, we have Juniper Galvani in the witness chair, who's a youth advocate, who's going to say more eloquently, and maybe more eloquently than you can, why this is so important for our youth. Thanks, Juniper.
Thank you, Senator Hinsdale. You put that wonderfully. I couldn't have said it better myself. First, I want to say good morning and thank you for having me. My name is Juniper Galvani. I'm a junior at Mount Mansfield High School, and I also take advantage of the dual enrollment program through CCV. I'm 17, and I also intern within the casting group, so you might have seen me sitting on the side of your committee taking notes. And that's actually how I was able to hear about the bill and be here today, so I'm really grateful for that. This issue is one that really hits close to home for me. The technology that my generation has grown up with is so unique compared to other generations, and I feel like the kids in my generation are kind of like the unintentional guinea pigs for this. And so I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to testify today and to share with you some of my experiences using technology as a teenager, and how some of the provisions in this bill will affect me, my peers, and the younger kids coming up behind us. Some of the provisions in this bill that I think would have a significant impact on kids are the screen time limitations, limiting the push notifications, prohibiting addictive design features, and improving the privacy settings. The truth is that I spend a lot of time on my phone, and so do my friends and really everyone I know. My friends and I talk a lot about what we think the future will look like, and phones have become a really common theme. We think that social media has become the root of so many problems for our generation, but even thinking this, we're still using our phones for all hours of every day. Even though we may think it's bad for us and want to use our phones less, it's also where so much of our social interaction takes place. It feels like I kind of have to use it. if I'm not, then I feel like I'm isolating myself from everyone around me. And our phones and social media have kind of become a catch-22 where we don't think it's good for us, but we do it anyway because it's where we interact. I'll share one specific personal experience with you that I think really illustrates how provisions in this bill might be useful in supporting kids' mental health. The thing about social media is that everyone is on it, not just your friends. And so there's a lot of negativity between kids that happens on social media. It's not the case anymore that you can get away from whatever's going on in school when you go home. It just comes with you in your pocket. So the experience that I'll share with you happened one morning a few months ago when I woke up feeling good and normal. And of course, the first thing I do is pick up my phone to see what's there. All my notifications are waiting for me. And the first one I clicked on was just a really intense negative post that made me really upset and anxious. And it really just threw off my whole entire day. So because I've been thinking a lot about the impact of social media recently, when that happened, I really wanted to get off my phone and off of social media. And so I did make an effort over the next few days to cut back. I think I cut back my screen time by like 2 hours even. But in the end, it didn't last because it's where all my peers are interacting and it's where everyone communicates. And so it was really isolating to not be a part of that. It almost feels as if there's no other option. And I think we're all aware of how bad it is, but we really need help changing it. This bill would do two really important things. It would limit the timing of when push notifications are allowed and overall limit the amount of time that kids would spend on their phones, both protecting key times of the day from incidental impacts like that, like the one I just described, and forcing us to spend time off of our phones altogether. The time that we spend on our phones is immense, and it's time that we should be using to self-reflect, to figure out who we are, to interact in person with each other, to grow as people, and to see how the world works. Furthermore, I think social media makes it really difficult for us to create a strong sense of identity. I find myself every day making decisions based on what I think other people will think or what will be the best photo op. I'll be in the middle of a fun activity or a wholesome moment, and then suddenly, without thinking, I'm pulling out my phone to take pictures and videos. And then when those videos aren't up to the standard of what I would post on my social media, I lose interest in the thing that was just bringing me actual joy is suddenly ordinary and boring and drained. It feels like the things that we didn't post didn't really happen. Social media creates this overwhelming pressure to demonstrate yourself. And it makes you feel like you're not enough, and it creates a lot of unrealistic expectations to live up to, especially for girls. I think, but everyone. And finally, the bill addresses privacy issues. And given the amount of time that kids are spending on their phone using social media, we're like data gold mines to these companies who are using that information to keep us on our phones in this self-perpetuating loop that kids just don't have the power to break. Which is why I think this bill is so important, and I really appreciate the committee for giving it consideration. I think this legislation is an opportunity to help kids engage in the real world and to rebalance the real world with the value that kids are placing right now on social media. So, in conclusion, I could go on for hours and hours about this, and I'm around 2 days a week, so if anyone wants to hear more, I'd love to talk about it. But I only have 5 minutes here today, so I'll leave you with this. This high level of technology is part of our everyday world now, and there's no changing that. And it's a useful tool. But we do have an opportunity with this bill to make it safer for our kids, to take a huge step towards helping the mental crisis in Vermont. And I think, frankly, this is an opportunity to make Vermont a leader by helping our kids take back their lives so that they can become involved, self-sufficient adults in the years to come.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Now you're like a proud aunt. That was
I do questions. Yeah, I have 2 questions for you. Thank you. It astonishes me because it's just, so does Harwood have you check your phones at the door?
Mount Mansfield. And
Mount Mansfield, sorry.
no, right now the policy they have in place is for freshmen and sophomores. Every class they have to put their phone in a caddy at the front. And then for juniors and seniors, it's just whatever the teacher decides. So I have one teacher who makes us put our phones in the front, but the rest of my classes are allowed to have them.
And I guess because I think,
I will say there is a bill in Senate Education
Yes, I know.
about phone regulation in schools.
yeah.
I am having conversations with the chair of Senate Education. I just don't want to combine the bills.
You need the banana peel.
Oh, it's okay. Second question is, you talk about addictive features. What do you experience as an addictive feature?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The
Okay.
push notifications that pop up, so like there's a notifications for text which are just normal, but then I'll get notifications like, hey, check out this video on TikTok, like cause you liked this, this, and this is why we're showing you this. Or like, hey, so and so just posted on Instagram, go take a look. And it's just to draw me in, to get me on the app and looking at it. And then there's other features like the infinite scroll where you can just scroll through videos never ending. It'll just keep loading in more, and they're using our data of what we like, what we look at, for how long we look at it for, just everything about it to feed us more videos that they think we'll like, things kind of that nature. Honestly, just everything.
No, that's helpful.
Those are just the ones we can
Yeah.
see even right off our experience.
Exactly. And just the timing of when they send you notifications, it's all planned out. There's a really interesting documentary that I watched for school actually called The Social Dilemma. I think they're
Yeah.
just showing
Yes.
it here a few
Yes.
days ago. Yeah, they get really deep into that kind of stuff, and it's really interesting.
And my last question is, I'm just gonna ask, because as a parent with kids who were on the cusp of of digital, they're the same age, yeah, they're back the same. What did your parents do to regulate? What do your parents currently do to help in this situation and be productive partners in this?
So my mom, for me, she has some screen time app limits. So for apps like TikTok, which is really just that whole infinite scroll, that's the whole basis of the app. She limits it to like an hour a day. For things like Instagram, she'll limit it to an hour a day. But that's really all that she can do, is set the limits on the app. She can't adjust privacy settings. She can't do any of those things that are mentioned in this bill.
But can you have no electronics at the table, for example?
Yes,
Does she say the phone has to be off by 9 at night so you can actually read a book?
When I was
Stuff like
younger,
that.
she tried to do that, but I think it's difficult as a parent, and I definitely see her
appreciate it.
struggle. And
Read books under the sheets with the.
Yeah, with the flashlight.
I know, I remember doing that as a kid, putting my iPad in a big picture book so I could watch it as I was going to bed. Like, I think she does what she can, but it's so easy to just sneak, and especially as I've gotten older and I have my own phone and my own computer, there's just no way she can get around it, really. Like, I'm free range. But I don't really like to see.
Wow.
Well,
Those are-
that's different.
Well, I also love your kids are a data goldmine.
Yeah.
And it's financial, I mean, it all
Oh,
comes
yeah.
down to,
Making other
they
people money.
wanna make money off of you.
Right.
Great that you know that.
But a sixth grader doesn't, or fifth grader.
No, and even when you know it, I mean, it happens to adults too, but it's just more insidious
Yeah.
with kids.
Anytime I buy anything online, their ads pop up within 30 seconds.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I was talking about how I need a new bathing suit for a vacation I'm going on, and suddenly every other post on my social media is an ad for a bathing suit.
Yeah.
They're listening to us.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's so scary. And just the fact that I'm gonna grow up in this world where it's just ever changing and it's continuing to develop, especially with AI, the fact that they have that much information on me that can
Right.
just be so easily turned to use against me is honestly just terrifying.
But that doesn't deter you.
I can't talk to my friends any other way. We
Well,
don't.
sure you can. You can talk to each other like this and you can
Yes,
call.
yeah, we can, but we don't. And I think we
It's a
need
choice.
need the help to kind of help us move in that direction. And that's why I think this bill is really important, because I think that'll kind of give us that little push that we need to start making the changes for ourselves.
Mhm. And we'll talk about this more as we go. We have a pediatrician in the room, but there's a shot of dopamine that isn't your choice, so we do have to use the language of addiction as we talk about this. And it's really brave to be saying what many of us experience, which it's become,
Start speaking of.
it's become such an integral part of even just how we think, that we think with our phones. So it's brave to talk about, and
It
really
is.
not just the voice of your generation, but of the full experience we're all having with.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing.
you all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll look forward to seeing you in the building.
You always have time in our committee to speak, and
Thank
we're really
My
grateful that you.
favorite committee to sit in.
Oh, grateful you opened up the hearing. Yeah. Do you want to say anything, Senator White, before you go? I just want to say thank you for taking up this bill, because even the adults need some assistance. It feels a little bit like how we regulate alcohol, like ABV.
Yeah.
Like we limit the potency of certain things because we know that the experience of folks who are addicted or in the process of becoming dependent on it need to have limitations, because the seller of that product has no desire to limit it. So it feels kind of like that conversation.
Exactly.
We allow it to exist, but we need to limit the potency of it, especially for them.
Good.
Well said, yeah.
And so thank you.
Ciao, Bella. See you
Often
soon.
after I do shut off my phone, I just
Right.
had a pop up from my daughter with a picture of the Valentine her husband sent her.
Exactly.
I have no need to,
Great.
but it's there.
It's there. It's there. Thank you so much again. Jen, for
Yeah.
moving this conversation.
She is the addiction.
So what I haven't said yet is that we're really grateful to be joined by people from all over the country who are working on this issue, working in partnership with many states.
Is that
And
all those
with-
people?
Yes, and all the faceless people that come on Zoom. But, you know, these are folks who are working with Congress, the president. Will we get something out of Washington? You know, it's doubtful. But these are also folks who probably are up very early if they're on the West Coast. So thank you for being with us. Next on my list, I have Josh Golan from Fair Play. Good morning.
That's what fair play is.
I think so.
Oh, man, sorry, my camera's having issues. There we go. Good morning, and tough act to follow, Juniper, but thank you, Chair Ram Hinsdale and the committee for holding this hearing of critical importance to Vermont's families and for inviting me to testify. My name is Josh Golan, and I am a resident of Newfane, Vermont, and the parent of a 15-year-old girl. I'm also executive director of Fair Play, a national advocacy organization committed to building a world where kids can be kids, free from the harmful manipulations of big tech and the false promises of marketers. Through corporate campaigns and regulatory filings, we have changed the marketing and data collection practices of some of the world's biggest companies. We also advocate for policies that would help create an internet that is safe for young people and not exploitative or addictive. For more than a decade, social media companies have been performing a vast, uncontrolled experiment on our children. 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C. with families who have paid the ultimate price as a result of that experiment. You may have seen those families on the news when Mark Zuckerberg apologized to them at the Senate hearing. These parents have lost their children to online harms, including cyberbullying, pro-eating disorder and suicide content, sextortion, and dangerous viral challenges. And they traveled to Capitol Hill to send lawmakers a clear message. Big tech cannot be trusted to protect kids and teens online, and it is time to regulate those powerful companies. That is the same message I bring to you today to urge the advancement of the Vermont Kids Code. Digital platforms are designed to maximize engagement because the longer they capture a user's attention, the more money they make by collecting data and serving targeted ads. As a result, children are subject to manipulative design and relentless pressure to use these platforms as often as possible. I think you heard Juniper describe it really well, how many kids recognize that this makes them feel bad, that it's not good for them, and yet they can't stop using it. Over a third of teenagers say they are on social media almost constantly. Overuse of social media displaces critical offline activities like sleep, exercise, face-to-face interactions, which in turn undermines children's well-being. Big tech's profit-driven focus on engagement doesn't just harm young people by fostering compulsive overuse. It also exploits their developmental needs, often at the expense of their safety and well-being. For example, displays of likes and follower counts take advantage of young people's desire for social approval and invite harmful social comparisons and incentivize interactions with strangers and postings of provocative and risque content. And thanks to Attorney General Clark and this lawsuit against Meta, we now know that Meta conducted internal experiments where they hid likes from a subset of users and found that it was effective in making young people feel better. But Meta never implemented that feature in HID likes because it would reduce engagement. So a clear example of how they chose to maximize their profits over what they knew would be better for kids. Another way that young people are harmed is by algorithms designed to maximize engagement that fill their feeds with the curated content that is most likely to keep them online, without regard for that user's well-being or potential harmful consequences. So on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, depressed teens are shown content promoting self-harm. And young people interested in exercise are barraged with content promoting eating disorders. A report from my organization found that Meta profits from 90,000 unique pro-eating disorder accounts on Instagram that reach more than 6 million minors, some as young as 9 years old. At this point, it's clear that tech platforms will not unilaterally disarm in their race for children's precious attention, nor can we expect young people to extract themselves from the exploitative platforms where their friends are. And I think Juniper spoke really eloquently to that. Nor can we expect overworked parents to monitor every moment their kids are online. The brave parents I went to DC with 2 weeks ago had delayed giving their kids phone, set limits, and had regular conversations with their children about their social media use. And still, that wasn't enough. We need new legislation that puts brakes on big tech's harmful business model and curbs dangerous and unfair design practices that fuel compulsive overuse, exposure to harmful and age-inappropriate content, cyberbullying, eating disorders, harms to mental health, and the sexual exploitation of children. The Kids Code is exactly that kind of legislation. It will serve as a critical counterbalance to big tech's toxic business model by creating a duty of care that will prohibit social media companies and other online platforms from profiting at the expense of children's well-being, privacy, or safety. Instead of focusing solely on maximizing engagement, platforms will be required to assess how their data collection practices and design choices affect children, and to change those practices that are harming kids. And instead of putting the onus on the families to navigate a maze of confusing settings just to have a safer, more age-appropriate experience, it requires minors' privacy and account settings to be on the most protective settings by default. And it would make Vermont a leader in the growing movement to protect kids online. Thank you so much for having me here today, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Josh. I forgot we had a Vermonter who's engaged in this national, based out of Newfane, no less.
Yeah.
It does strike me, you know, as we talk about why can't we just talk in person, et cetera. We're also a rural state. I mean, each type of environment has their own challenges, you know, but we're losing teen space. They don't have other options, you know. Do you also help people answer the question, you know, why is this so hard and becoming harder for our teens to have space elsewhere and to be able to interact in person?
Another reason to live densely. This ties right into our housing bill.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think a state, and like I think that's an excellent point. You know, this is not a state where you know, for some kids, it's not simply a case of being able to ride their bike to their friend's house or socialize easily in you know, gather together in real spaces. And so those online spaces become even more important, that they are designed in ways that support kids' well-being. You know, when I think about, you know, there is no other major influence in children's lives. You know, when we think about institutions that children regularly interact with, whether it's schools, whether it's families, whether it's medical professions, those professions, you know, we may make mistakes, but we're all set up to, you know, our charge is to do what's best for children. Kids are spending 8 to 10 hours a day on platforms that are completely agnostic about their well-being. It's not that they set out to harm children, it's just that their goal is to make profit off of them. And so I think, you know, what we have seen over the last 10, 15, 20 years is that just doesn't work for children and families. And I think your point about rural families and the limitations on their abilities to gather in real life spaces, I think it's even more critical for many families in Vermont.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for your work.
Yeah, your senator's right here.
Yeah, proud to have you. It's my constituent.
It's, yeah, we moved here last summer and it's great to be in Vermont and, look forward to working with you all to get this passed.
Yeah, we're gonna have kind of a digital legislative conversation hosted by UVM one Monday, hopefully in March, and I want to make sure that you're on the list, so I'm making a verbal note to everyone. But thank
Okay.
you for work.
Thank you.
Next in person, we have Dr. Heidi Schumacher. Full disclosure, she is my neighbor. I did not invite her to this. And apparently our other neighbor who's a pediatrician is floating around. It's also going in the house.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Ramsdell and members of the committee. It is such a joy to be with you all today. My name is Heidi Schumacher. I'm a general pediatrician here in Vermont and speaking on behalf of the Vermont chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's an honor to be with you today to give my word on behalf of Vermont's pediatricians for our full support for the Vermont Kids Code bill. And I can't stress how strongly we feel as child health professionals for the real benefits that this bill can have in really protecting the health and well-being of Vermont's kids and adolescents. As pediatricians, we are committed to supporting the health and well-being of young people and their ability to thrive. It is for this reason that the American Academy of Pediatrics supports the common sense measures in the Vermont Kids Code to implement privacy by default and safety by design protections for kids as they interact with their peers and the world online, which Juniper reminded us is just such a central way that young people are interacting these days. As the committee is well aware, in the year 2024, children and adolescents live within an increasingly digital world. In the 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey, 73% of Vermont's high schoolers and 57% of Vermont's middle schoolers reported spending 3 hours or more a day on screens, including social media. Even for younger age groups, digital media is omnipresent and use of algorithm-driven apps can have risks. I will never forget a few years ago when I set my 4-year-old son up to watch the Thomas the Tank Engine video on YouTube. We had set up the age restrictions on YouTube for the app's instructions with all the filtered things. I read all these blog posts on how you set up the design so that my son could just watch Thomas the Train video. And so that when the video ended, because I knew other content would pop up, that those age restrictions I thought would protect him from only seeing age appropriate content. A few minutes later, while I was emptying the dishwasher on the other side of the room, I heard inappropriate language blaring from the screen. Adult content had broken through YouTube's age filter and was beaming into my 4-year-old's very wide eyes. And I just can't help but think, if as a pediatrician who's interested in this space, who thought I'd done all the steps and followed the instructions of the app to protect my 4-year-old's child in a benign video watching scenario, how can we possibly expect other parents and caregivers to be positioned to be continuously responsible for the safety and privacy of their youth online, especially as Juniper reminded us that many young people, especially adolescents, are doing so in fairly independent ways. There is no doubt that social media can play a really positive role in the lives of people, expanding their social networks and allowing marginalized youth in particular to find community. But in too many cases, young people themselves believe, again, as Juniper reminded us, that they are spending too much time on social media, but find themselves unable to unplug because of the features intentionally designed to keep them hooked. While spending so much time online, as others have said, they are being regularly exposed to dangerous content and unhealthy habits that pose a direct risk to their health and well-being. In that same 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey, 29% of Vermont's middle schoolers and 17% of Vermont's high schoolers reported being bullied online, with significantly higher rates among females in both age groups. Such bullying is directly correlated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. And nationally, 25% of 9 to 17-year-olds reported having an online sexually explicit interaction. And Instagram, as we just heard, registers 90,000 unique pro-eating disorder accounts with a reach of many millions of followers. So again, as others have said, much of the motivation of social media platforms and their design, which intentionally facilitates prolonged use, is financial. That social media companies, I don't think I will ever forget this headline. Social media companies collectively made over $11 billion last year in US advertising revenue from minors alone, according to data from Harvard's School of Public Health. Meta derives an estimated $230 million annually from pro-eating disorder accounts alone. Our kids, Vermont's kids, deserve better. The Vermont Kids Code would put common sense measures in place to improve young people's digital experiences by requiring tech companies to implement privacy by design, privacy by default, and safety by design protections for kids online. This means not collecting or selling kids' data, setting high privacy standards by default, and avoiding manipulative design. Government safety measures are already in place for everyday items like vehicles and car seats, as the senator said. We should use similar logic when protecting young people's safety in their digital lives. So in summary, the Vermont chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics urges our collective positive vote on the Vermont Kids Code, our children's online safety and well-being depend on. Thank you for the opportunity.
Have you submitted, and Josh, also for you, all three of you, have you submitted all your testimony to Magali? Please do.
I will.
Yes.
Great.
It is on the committee. Yes, absolutely. Any questions? Just a pediatrician, yeah.
Thank you so much. A term I haven't heard before is pro-eating disorder.
Question.
So I'm assuming that that means a site or a company that whose content does cause or is related to eating disorders, but it's just an interesting term to use.
I welcome others who have expertise, Josh. I don't know if you're still on actually, but others who have expertise in this to define sort of definitionally, but I think
But is
my
that what it
response
is?
to that would be, regardless of even whether it's considered a pro-eating disorder account or just general content on social media, we know that young women in particular are heavily prone to real impact, as Juniper spoke to, for body image questions, concerns, distortions based on content that they're seeing on social media. And that is leading to real behavior change for young women that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to with interactions.
Yes, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. I'm aware of that, and it's horrendous. I mean, it's just has lasting harm. Do those folks know that they're tagged as pro eating disorder?
I don't know the answer
I mean,
to that.
my-
And Josh,
one
I
thing
don't know
we
if
just-
others who are experts here know.
Yeah, will we promote, or does it mean
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
you're susceptible to?
I think
I don't
it
understand.
means promoting, but they probably wouldn't call themselves that.
No, they call probably promoting particular body images that you need to meet.
And probably even actions that
Right.
are considered ill-advised by medical professionals.
Right.
We're gonna go to some other witnesses who I think will help us, answer this question. It struck me, I think everyone's been really brave and, I think most women end up with postpartum anxiety, depression after having a child. And the algorithm that I'm in is like, you can do it all and you can keep your house clean and you can, it absolutely.
Woman,
Yeah.
Right, you could be.
Absolutely crave. I mean, I am a perfect candidate for you still have so much control if you can do all of this. And before you realize it, you're in this algorithm that is very unhealthy.
Right. It's just interesting to me that there's a list of pro eating disorder. I mean, I would like to see that list.
I mean, I think in the end, the real opportunity that I see here is we've heard from young people, I hear in my practice all the time from young people that they not only rely on social media for everyday interactions, but especially for marginalized children. Supporting safe use of social media is such a positive thing and it is possible. We just have to engage with our tech companies to make sure that they put in place the safety measures that they know how to do. They just should motivated to do it.
Senator Blake.
by
Yeah, right. Oh, maybe we should. I guess my question to you is, what percent of your young people of your patients have had detrimental physical, both physical and mental impact? I mean, how have you experienced it as a pediatrician, and what percent of your patients would you say have been detrimentally affected by?
That's a great question. I mean, I think every young person with whom I speak about social media acknowledges some experience, maybe similar to what Juniper described, in which even if generally they may have a positive experience, they're exposed to negativity, to privacy and safety standards that cause untoward impact. If for no other reason, I don't think there's a single young person I've talked to who doesn't say, I want to get on social media at one time or another, and I literally can't do it, which is impacting my sleep, which is impacting my ability to engage in other activities, which does impact my feeling of empowerment that I can participate in activities that maybe I used to love, but now I'm so busy scrolling or I'm so tired that I can't just access them.
So you experience it with kids not sleeping enough, and
It's a huge one, sleep
So,
alone.
yeah.
Again, Juniper, I'd be interested in your answer to the question, but I think, I can't think of a young person who has asked questions on social media who hasn't acknowledged a sleep impact of their use of social media. And I personally experienced it just the other night after the Super Bowl. I found myself 2 hours, maybe not 2 hours, an hour after the Super Bowl, scrolling for articles on Taylor Swift. Post Super Bowl. I didn't even care about the Super Bowl for 1 second, and suddenly an hour later, I was still reading articles about Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. Neither of them I care about. But because the apps that I was on kept feeding me stories about them because I looked at them previously. So it's really an omnipresent risk. I think that's the inherent product. By design.
Yeah, did you want to add anything from what you heard?
I mean, yeah, sure. I think the sleep thing is definitely true. And I find myself, I'll lay down in bed at 10 p.m. to go to bed early. Next thing I know, it's 2 in the morning and I'm still on TikTok. And so that, I also, the eating disorder part, I would like to speak to a little bit. I think with the promotion of it, I have had experiences where there's an influencer who maybe they're in recovery from an eating disorder themselves, but that's definitely something that I personally struggles with. And just there was this one influencer in specific during COVID time that I remember, she would post what I eat in a day, recovering from anorexia, and I remember getting so triggered by those videos, and it just had it on my mind all the time. Those videos would come up every day, and every day I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm eating too much, I'm not eating enough. It's exposing kids who maybe hadn't heard of anorexia or hadn't thought of that as a thing, and now it's on their mind. And now even though she's recovering from it, kids are thinking, oh well, do I need to have that? Do I need to eat less now? Do I need to do this? And so I think it can be confusing saying that they're pro eating disorder because maybe they're not pro eating disorder, but they're still exposing kids to that, giving them that.
I think the other thing that I should have responded to with your previous question is the online bullying thing is real. We hear that from patients all the time. Again, it's not always the explicit, extremely dramatic bullying episode that you might think of to stay in an in-person physical space, but it's the sort of microaggression, especially for some of our marginalized community, microaggressions online. It's sort of slights here and there. It's even things like not liking posts by one person and only liking posts from another things. I mean, those are all perceived by many young people as bullying, and there are mental health implications there for sure. But that translates to lots of other long-term outcomes, missed school, somatic symptoms. I mean, it's really a long trajectory.
Yeah, it's bringing me back to my AOL days. Scary.
I'm still in my AOL days. It makes me feel like an internet pioneer.
But thank you. Yeah, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the work. Yeah.
I remember that too. They would rent them for special occasions.
You know, so we're asking ourselves, how do we do this? Can we do this? Why would we, you know, spend time on this and go up against tech giants? And I think few people can answer that question better than our next witness, Frances Hagan, who's a Meta whistleblower and, you know, has really helped set off a chain of events for us to be treating this like a public health emergency. So thanks so much. Sorry, I timed my phone.
Don't be sorry. It's delicious.
Spotlight me, delightful. Hi, welcome everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I'm so glad that you're taking up this issue. Like you mentioned, this is a matter of critical public health interest. And I'm so glad that the states aren't waiting for the federal government to act because, you know, these are our kids' lives. And every year that goes by, you know, that's a year that makes up a huge fraction of each of those children's lives. We invest a huge amount of attention in understanding who are the adults that our children spend time with. We run our teachers through background checks. We ask sometimes probing questions of the parents of our children's friends. And we do this because the people that our kids spend their time with shape who they are. Social media has changed a huge amount since, say, 2010. You know, when I ask people, what is Facebook for? What is Instagram for? A lot of people will say things like, it's for keeping up with my family and friends. You know, back in 2010, that was true when it came to Facebook. You know, it was kind of like a fancy inbox, you know, an email inbox. You know, you pick who you want to receive content from, and that's people who you would hear from. But over time, those products change in really profound ways because your friends and family let Facebook down. You know, if your friends and family had kept producing kind of infinitely more content, we could still have products that were mostly about our family and friends. But a trend that has happened across product after product after product, it can be Facebook, it can be Instagram, it can be Pinterest, it can be TikTok, is that if companies want you to consume ever more content, they want you to spend ever more time on these products, and they need to do that because they're advertising supported. You know, every minute you spend on Instagram, you spend on TikTok, is more money that those companies make. The problem with that is now we've moved from a world where you can look at who your children are interacting with. You know, what are you intentionally choosing, to instead putting your kids in the hands of an artificial intelligence, an algorithm, which is picking out the content they see. Because once you move from people choosing what you see to computers choosing what you see, you can keep people online for basically infinite amounts of time. There's always something out there in the world they can show you. The problem with this is those algorithms are amoral. You know, we've already had people talk about the idea that, you know, you can have a child go and look up for information about healthy eating, about exercise, and the algorithm will go, oh, interesting. This is the topic area you're interested in. This content is what keeps you online longer. And often that content is more extreme content. And Meta was very, very clear about this in their documents. And we've seen from things like the filings from the attorneys general, that Meta actually had a huge amount of research on this idea that content that is provoking, is extreme, would keep kids online longer. One of the things that that happens also when you start to have these fancy algorithms that pick out what you get to see instead of an email inbox type model, you know, where it's your family and friends, you're seeing their updates, is now whether or not you mesh, you click with that algorithm, is whether or not you're going to get that attention. And so when we talk to kids talk about how intense the moment is right after they post, because that next hour, that next 2 hours is the moment of truth. Do people like them? Like, is what they did valid? Is it interesting enough? And that's really, really problematic on a number of levels. First, if we rolled back in time to the 80s, there were very, very few 13-year-olds in the world that were intensely thinking about shaping their personal brand, you know, shaping how much did the public like them? Did anonymous people out there approve of them? Like, think about that. Those 13-year-olds did not turn out well. And yet we've decided that it is safe and developmentally appropriate to expose all the children in the United States to this experience. The other issue is around what Josh talked about in terms of developmental vulnerabilities. When we have advertising supported models, that means more time on the platform equals more money for those companies. Keeping your kids online as late as possible just means more minutes to make money. The Surgeon General last year announced that 30% of adolescents were on screens till midnight on most school nights, right? Contemplate that for a moment. If 30% are on until midnight, probably 10 or 15% are on until 2 a.m. Sleep deprivation is I think is the most serious danger of social media for kids, because the data is extremely, extremely clear that sleep deprivation hurts kids in school. It physically hurts their development, increases the chance of mental illness issues, not just depression, but also things like bipolar or schizophrenia, increases substance use, uppers because they're tired, downers because they're depressed, risk of dying from accidents, not just car accidents, but accidents of all kinds. This is a really simple thing where kids probably shouldn't be online past 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And yet lots and lots of kids are glued to those screens until 2 a.m. The last thing I'm going to close you with is just a couple things that I think big tech is going to tell you about this bill. They're going to be like, no, you can't do this bill. The only way we can protect children is to have a giant database of IDs. And do you want a giant database of IDs? There are lots and lots of ways to find kids online. We now have a number of different technologies where each of them may only be, say, 95% precise. But when you combine them all together, we can find all the kids. There's not one way of finding kids, checking IDs. There's 10 or 15 different ways. And I'm happy to talk to you more offline about the world of possibility we have when it comes to keeping kids safe. They're going to say this should be done at the app store level. Facebook has put a huge amount of money into online advertising saying, parents should have the ability to control what apps kids install on their phones. I strongly support giving parents more tools, more choices. But that doesn't do anything to guarantee that the apps they do install are going to be safe. In the opening speech, we talked about the idea that you don't question if your car seat is safe. There's a duty of care to make sure that car seat is appropriate. We need to have a duty of care for those apps even after the parents approve that they're being installed. And then lastly, they're going to say, we're already doing lots and lots to keep kids safe. One of the things that I found very hypocritical about a lot of the statements they've made in the last year is they've started publishing lists of all the safety features they rolled out. If we were to stack rank those features and figure out which ones have the biggest impact on kids, the vast majority of those all got launched in a couple-week period in the summer of 2021. And that's because the UK passed the age-appropriate design code. And when they did that, Facebook was like, well, we're going to raise the floor for the whole world. They have tools to keep kids safe. They choose not to use them because they make less money just a little bit less money, not even tons less money, but they make less money and they grow slower when they prioritize the safety of children. We need laws like what you're considering right now, because we need to change the incentives that these platforms operate under. Kids are vulnerable. They need appropriate software. They need appropriate places to congregate online. They need to be prioritized. And the only way that's going to happen is if people like you stand up and change the incentives that these companies operate under. So, thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Are you based, Francis, in Vermont?
I am not. I have a very intense sensitivity to cold, so I live in Puerto Rico, where it is nice and pleasant and warm all year.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate the way you talked about prioritizing kids in that space. It's a conversation we need to have more in our physical and digital space, but just how we prioritize kids.
Generally, we get more people here in this building when we're addressing animal rights than we do when we address children. So,
Really?
oh, it's,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
And there's so on.
Can I throw in one more thing? One other thing to keep in mind, people talk a lot about choices. They'll say this should be about parents policing this issue. This should be about kids making better choices. One concept that I think often gets dropped is you hear from a lot of kids, I want to spend more time in person with my friends. But though to make that choice, to actually have it be a real choice, their friends have to make that choice at the same time. Like a single family can't say, I want to spend more time in person with people unless other people make that choice at the same time. And that's why raising the floor is so important in terms of giving people even the chance to make choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us and for really putting yourself on the line to blow the whistle.
Yeah, just a comment. I really appreciate how you phrased the effort that we put into protecting our kids from individual people and making those people jump through hoops, and how we're ignoring that pretty much from the internet, which has their ear and their eye and their attention for far long,
Yeah.
more hours in the day than those people.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to frame it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Clarkson.
It is making me happier that most of the influences in our lives are impressed upon us between 0 and 7, before the internet has this opportunity to do this.
Although, no, for kids, it's.
Oh, no,
we
but
can
0
talk
to
about-
7 is still the magic time. But you're right, increasingly,
No, it's
4 to 7
monsters.
is heavily.
Yeah.
Francis, I'm just curious, and maybe you don't, anyway, I'm not gonna anticipate your answer, but what was the incident in your life that prompted you to become a professional meta whistleblower?
I would say there's two different points in there. So one is like what made me decide to make sure that the public had the information that I thought they needed in order to make real choices. That moment was when they dissolved the part of the company that was responsible for trying to make sure Facebook was a positive force in the world. So I was a member of a group called Civic Integrity. We worked on things like ethnic violence in African countries. Because remember, in other places in the world, like Facebook actively causes violent conflict. And this is not my opinion, this is like the UN's opinion. That team got dissolved. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, I don't think Facebook has the will to solve these problems. But the moment where I decided to come forward publicly was my lawyers were very, very adamant that I was in kind of a unique predicament because Meta knew who I was, right? Like there's only one person who looked at that kind of span of content. And the question was like, would they out me? And if they outed me, like they would get to define the narrative, right? Like we would always be on the back foot. And so they basically said, like, you need to decide whether or not you're going to take responsibility for your actions, because otherwise, like your unwillingness to step forward may be actually used to undermine the effectiveness of the documents that you brought forward. So.
Thank you.
Well,
Now, very interesting. I
Yeah.
didn't realize they had dissolved their civic engagement.
they didn't publicize that very much, right?
Yeah, the Information wrote a great piece on it when it happened, but the Information is also like a paywalled, tech journal.
What
so
happened to the
one of these things.
No, it's not. Yeah.
You said it again? Yeah.
The Atlantic, I mean, I feel like
Oh, yeah.
Northern New York, company, if you will.
Juniper has an Atlantic article. Oh, right. You. So we'll get
I
to
want,
that.
that's.
It's not real unless it's in the Atlantic.
Or the New Yorker, or the New York Times.
Thank you to this team of pediatricians. I'm so lucky that you're in the building today.
It's
So
great,
thank
it's a
you,
great,
Sophie.
perfect
Miracle.
alignment.
And it, it does even have a baby.
Oh, and you're having fun.
I think, I imagine too, to Senator Fluxon's question or point, I mean, I've started asking my pediatrician what people ask me as another parent, like what screen time makes sense. I used reading computer programs when I was a young kid. So we used like Duolingo, which is an app where you can learn how to write letters, and I really value it. I think we might hopefully hear from our former Attorney General, who is at Roblox, who can talk about the ways that you can use technology in a safe way with kids 0 to 7, especially when we're talking 5 to 7. I imagine that they're starting to interact.
Yeah,
quite a bit.
That's.
I don't know if any pediatricians in the room, just have thoughts about how you're coming to parents.
Yeah, I can respond on that one. I think it's a great point. I mean, one of the things that I've learned in this space is that, again, technology, there are many positive aspects of technology for school age,
for younger kids, school age kids, all the way through adolescence and beyond. And I think what appeals to me most about this bill is that it supports positive, safe use of that technology. Because there are many positive things. Again, there is technology that is transforming how education is delivered in lots of different spaces, right? Think about during the pandemic. If we hadn't had technology, kids would have literally been out of school, you know, for some that worked better than others. But I think there are many positive aspects to technology and yet many risks. So weighing those pros and risks and thinking about how can we leverage the pros and minimize the risks, I think is the best path forward.
You look like you want to say something. Okay. Somebody else. We're fortunate to have another youth advocate with us, Trisha Prabhu from Rethink, or who founded Rethink. So thanks so much for being with us. And feel free to tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm sure our
We'd all
friend
be
Adam
interested.
McCracken told you like 5 minutes, you know, but you took off script a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope my remarks will do that. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Senator Ram Hinsdale. And thank you all so much for your time and the opportunity to testify today. My name is Trisha Prabhu, and I am a 23-year-old Gen Z anti-hate activist and the founder and CEO of Rethink, a global movement with the mission of tackling cyberbullying and redefining internet culture to be more positive. So my journey in this space and in this work really started back when I was a 10-year-old. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, which is where I was born and raised. At that time, the community in which I lived was a predominantly white community. And that meant that I knew from a very young age what it felt like to be excluded, what it felt like to be isolated, and what it felt like to be different. That was always very apparent to me. It meant that as a kid, I faced some bullying and some remarks. And it also meant that when we all got phones, which of course happened, you know, quite soon, early on, I experienced cyber harassment. I received mean, disparaging remarks from people I often didn't know, or from people who were anonymous, about everything from my cultural background to the lunches I ate to my hair. It was extremely difficult. I was such a confident child. My mom would always say that I was extremely confident as a child. But when you're cyber harassed, it takes that confidence from you. I suddenly felt like I couldn't depend on anyone. I suddenly felt unsure of myself. I became quieter, more reserved. And of course, I was afraid, so I hid it. Like so many youth today, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't talk to an adult. I didn't talk to a teacher. I didn't talk to a counselor. I hid it and I dealt with it, or at least that's what I told myself. When the mean remarks finally started to subside, I, again, like so many victims of cyberbullying, just wanted to forget about it. I didn't want to think about it again ever in my life, and I wanted to move on. But it was actually a few years later, when I was 13, that one day I came home from school and I happened to read online the story of another young woman from a completely different state in the US, Florida, who had been cyberbullied for over a year and a half, receiving some of the worst messages I have ever seen. The world would be a better place without you. I hope you drink bleach and die. You are so ugly, and on and on and on. And unfortunately, she died by suicide because of that experience. And at 13, reading that story, for me, there were two moments of impact. One was, something is seriously wrong here. This is just unacceptable, what is going on. And two, for me, it was also a moment of realization of, oh, this isn't just a problem that I'm experiencing. I had thought for the longest time that the reason that I was cyberbullied was because there was something wrong with me. Reading the story was a realization of, no, in fact, online hate is a silent pandemic that is indiscriminately affecting youth across the US. It's something we've been taught to live with as young people, but something that we shouldn't have to, because we deserve an internet that is better than this. And so especially as a young person, I was fired up. I was frustrated on behalf of my fellow Gen Zers. And I felt like there simply weren't enough youth voices in the responsible technology space, that we needed more youth at the table. The fact that there weren't youth at the table, to me, was the reason why the only solutions we had to tackle cyberbullying were reactive and outdated. At the time when I was a child, the most common solution was to simply encourage youth to tell a parent about their experience. We know from research, and I can again personally testify from my own experience, that those types of solutions often don't work, that young people are scared, that they worry that they might get into trouble if they say something. And so my question was, is there some way I can redesign the internet so that the burden is not on the victim to act, but instead on the bully to pause and think before they say something that could be offensive? And so that is what led to the creation of Rethink, which is the initiative that I run today. We build technology that detects cyberbullying before it's sent and gives users a chance to pause, review, and rethink sending it. Put more simply, we add more friction into online communication. And the idea is that by giving them a moment to pause, we give youth a chance to think about who it is that they want to be online. We give them a chance to set themselves up to be responsible digital citizens, rather than get sucked into a digital environment that can make it feel like their words don't matter, that can make it feel like there are no consequences, when in fact there are definitely very, very real consequences. Building this movement has been so fulfilling for me. It's been an opportunity for me to take an experience that I wanted to forget and turn it into something positive. But even more relevant to all of you today, it's illustrated for me the power of investing in common sense solutions that address cyber harms like cyberbullying. In the case of Rethink, our research, which has been celebrated by Google and MIT, among other institutions, finds that a majority of youth aged 13 to 18, 93%, that receive a Rethink alert change their mind and decide not to say something offensive. It is that simple. And so this idea we often hear from tech companies over and over again, we're stuck with the social media we have, the internet is just too complex, we can't possibly do better than this, it's too hard to come up with a solution. That's an idea that I reject because this is work that I did as a teenager, right? I think my work is a testament to the fact that we can do better than this, that common sense solutions can be incredibly powerful. And this legislation, I think, too, is a phenomenal example of that, right? It's chock full of easy common sense solutions that can make the internet a more safe place for youth, that can realize the internet that I deserved as a young person and the internet that every young person deserves. We need this legislation. So that's me. That's my story. I hope that brings across my message. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm happy to answer any and all questions, and I'm also available as a resource for you all as you consider this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trisha. I will go check out your organization and your website. And I hope it's okay to say, as a fellow South Asian, I just so appreciate the Eastern philosophy you're bringing to just pause before you say something really unkind and mean. That's just such a simple idea that doesn't exist in a lot of our teaching spaces.
Exactly. I love, and that you talk about this friction, but what is it? 90% get what? What do they get that makes them pause?
So it's a alert that will pop up on their device when they're using, whether it's social media, email, or texting, that says, "Whoa, hold on, are you sure you want to post this?" And
so what prompts that alert? An ugly word, or they have to use what prompts that alert?
Yeah, so we've built technology that can intelligently detect whether what the keystrokes that youth are typing may be offensive. So if, for instance, a youth says something like "I hate you," then a prompt will appear. Now, of course, if a youth says something like "I hate the weather," which, being from Chicago, very fair sentiment, that alert will not pop up. So that's how it works. And the idea is to create more, as you said it, you put it so perfectly, more friction, and give them that chance to.
And we can all download this because we're all using to play on. Is this like something you could put on your phone? Anybody?
Yes. And I mean, yes, that is exactly the case. Anyone can put it on their device. We also have technology for Chromebooks and all of that.
That's great. It's under Rethink.
Rethink.
The app is called what?
Rethink. Yep.
Yeah. Nice. I hope President Obama is somewhere in this story, because I was just at his Democracy Forum in Chicago where he talked about AI and loneliness and accelerated technology, and I can't imagine he doesn't know what you're doing and is proud of it.
He actually invited me to the 2015 White House Science Fair. So yes, he is he is definitely somewhere in the story. Yes.
Well, you're all Chicago people.
Yeah.
That North Shore, yeah, that's a pretty wild community from, pretty homogeneous.
Well, thank you again, and really we've had a couple superstars who have taken a really personal experience and made it something incredibly positive and are helping us have the courage for this bill. So that's so appreciated. Thank you, and we hope to stay in touch.
Thank you so much, really interesting. And part of it.
Next up, we have Mitali Jain from the Tech Justice Law Project.
Good morning, Senators, and thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Mitali Jain, and I'm the director of the Tech Justice Law Project, an initiative that is supporting tech accountability litigation. I've been deeply involved in supporting the California AG in the litigation currently pending in the courts that challenges the constitutionality of the California Age-Appropriate Design Code. That law was enjoined by a district court in September of last year, and AG Bonta has now appealed that decision to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we expect that judgment to come down sometime this year. Big tech companies and their trade groups have invoked the Constitution at every turn to resist regulation. They'll tell you that the solution is digital literacy, or for schools to ban cell phones, or for parents to just do a better job at parenting. And there's no question, as you all have been discussing this morning, that we do need a lot of different solutions and we need everyone involved. But I'll tell you, as a mother of both a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, it is maddening to hear companies trying to blame us for the harms that the products they design are greatly contributing to. But I'll also be honest that I'm outraged as a lawyer who's both taught and practiced constitutional law for many years by how tech companies have weaponized our legal doctrines to ultimately protect their own profits. So you may wonder why you should pass a law that's similar to another law that's been found to perhaps violate the Constitution. I think the first thing you need to know is that these companies aren't making principled or nuanced First Amendment arguments. They're making crude arguments to avoid accountability. And at the center of their strategy is an attempt to manipulate the First Amendment by saying that all corporate business activity, including collecting data on kids or how they design their products, is First Amendment speech that cannot be regulated or reined in. Data is speech, they say. Code is speech, they say. And because corporations have speech rights under the First Amendment, they win. Game over. Never mind our kids' rights. Never mind the horrific evidence that AG Clark and other AGs around the nation have unearthed about how our children are preyed upon by these tech companies. No online kids safety regulation is possible. But let's be clear, big tech is not in the market of free speech. It is in the market of extracting personal data from our kids, as we've heard, through their online interactions, their expressions, their preferences, and then selling that data. And here's an example that hits very close to home for you all. AG Clark, as you know, has filed a pretty explosive lawsuit against Meta, based in part on the documents that Francis and others have brought forward. Those documents identify that while Instagram's penetration of the Vermont teen market was higher than in any other state in the country, approximately 80%, that the amount of time that Vermont teens spent on Instagram each day at that time was lower than in several other states. And so their conclusion was that it needed to refine the Instagram product in such a way that teens, like those in Vermont specifically, would spend more of their time on Instagram every day. That was their goal. And it's facts like this that really show where the California court got it wrong at the district court level. With respect, her opinion is breathtakingly unreasonable and reflects back the tech industry's arguments that everything is speech. The opinion has distorted Supreme Court precedent to suggest that companies are within their constitutional rights to collect and use our kids' data, however they choose. That the First Amendment, which we know has long upheld state authority to protect kids from exploitative labor practices, vaping, gambling, and right here in Vermont, right there in Vermont, I should say, I'm not there, from lead in products and harmful toys, that somehow the First Amendment doesn't allow states to require that companies design their products safely. The district court judge has also said that requiring tech companies to perform a risk assessment of the way they use kids' data is somehow unconstitutional because it could chill tech speech rights. But this is a routine assessment that's required in many industries and sectors. And regulators like the SEC, OSHA, and the FDA routinely require it. So this district court opinion may be there, but it has caused such widespread outrage that over 60 experts and organizations, including Francis, came forward in supporting the Attorney General on appeal. There were 24 law professors from around the country, 21 state AG offices, the FTC, American Academy of Pediatrics, and on, who said that the district court judge got it wrong. And that if her opinion is allowed to stand, it could harm not only any attempt to protect kids online, but effectively undermine any tech-related regulation, and even consumer protection frameworks, including Vermont's own Consumer Protection Act. It could hurt the ability of democratically elected legislatures like you to regulate data privacy more broadly, consumer protection, mandate transparency, and even regulate AI. And I know that all of these issues are top of mind for all of you. So we remain confident that the appellate court is going to get it right and deliver a reasonable analysis. But while it's doing this, Vermont can't wait for the courts to sort this out, nor is it bound by how the California court rules. This could take time. And meanwhile, Vermont's kids need online protections now. Vermont is already leading the charge in the nation with A.G. Clark's innovative lawsuit against Meta. Now it also needs a durable, forward-looking solution. And that is the Vermont Kids Code, a careful approach to regulation that focuses on design and data privacy and seeks to work with business, not penalize it, to protect our kids and promote innovation. Our Constitution is more sophisticated than the way that big tech has weaponized it. It tries to strike a balance between our competing values in our democracy, and that's what the Vermont Kids Code does too. It attempts to strike a balance between competing rights and values. And for those reasons, I urge you to support the law, and happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Any questions, especially for a lawyer?
Well, I have a question. The hearing thus far has largely centered on identifying the issues and the importance of dealing with the issues. We are making reference here to what is S-289, but my understanding is that there's a strike-all amendment that is going to change what's in S-289. It'd be very helpful to see S-289 so I know what we're really talking about. And we talk about the opinion of the district court in the California case, how that compares to what's in our bill. I don't think we have a good understanding of any of that at this point. We haven't even seen the bill. So the question is, where is the strike?
We're getting it from the printer, and you don't have to take their.
It's just in the bin. Isn't it in the bins? It's just in the bins outside.
Well, it's in the bin, but as I understand it, the strike law
Yes.
is replacing what's in the bin.
So we're getting both.
Okay, good.
We're getting both. And I think, yeah, as we start talking to attorneys and policy folks, we want to get into the into the details, so that's certainly warranted, and we'll continue the conversation as we.
As we talk about the district court case that you're referring, I assume that's the only case right now at the federal level that's dealing with this specific issue. What did that decision do? In other words, what were the allegations that were at issue here, and what did the decision come up with? And then thirdly, it's appealing, I guess, to the Ninth Circuit. When we anticipate seeing the result of the appeal? Do you have any
Yes.
idea of any of that?
Sure, Senator, thank you for the questions. Firstly, it is the only opinion thus far that has considered elements that try to use a design and data privacy approach. Now, the tech industry is going to come in and tell you that they have multiple judgments saying that regulation is unconstitutional. They've been obfuscating and throwing all kinds of different regulation into the same bucket. But California thus far is the only state that has used an approach that really centers data privacy and design. Other states have used other approaches. In terms of the allegations that were in the district court, it really was premised largely on the First Amendment and suggesting that the state of California, by adopting this law, was somehow chilling the corporation's free speech rights by telling it what to do, telling it what to say, telling it what not to say. And so in other words, it really foregrounded corporate speech rights over our kids' speech rights. And I think that's really, really fundamental to note, that was the direction of the arguments, and that was the argumentation that the district court adopted in her opinion. And as I said, the case has been appealed robustly by Attorney General Bonta, and we, as a collective civil society, have filed 13 amicus briefs in support of the AG's office. That briefing schedule is happening right now. We anticipate hearings to happen, the oral arguments to happen sometime in April. And then, it's always a little bit of looking into a crystal ball to try to determine when the decision is going to come down. We hope it comes down by summer, but there's no guarantee.
Of the 13 AGs, could you call it nonpartisan in any way? I mean, I know Casey, who's been working with us, went off to meet with Senator Ted Cruz, who's the supporter of this work. So it is somewhat of a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, so the 13 number that I referenced was actually the number of amicus briefs that came in support of the AG. There was one brief, which was a multi-state attorney general brief, and that actually had 21 AG offices on it. 17, I guess, Democratic offices and 4 Republicans. So I think we can say that it's, a really good showing of nonpartisanship.
Okay. So I apologize. Our strike all that we want to make sure is out the same day that we take this up is with the drafters. So it'll be on our website and paper copies. Sorry for that logistical interlude. Yeah.
Is what's in the strike all materially different than what's in the bill?
Do you remember if what I had said and what I understand is Casey Mock, who's involved with the Center for Humane Technology and an advocate with the bill, came to Vermont. He's former VEPSI director, actually, for Vermont. So he came back to visit and talk with our local tech companies. And many of them are, contemplating being public supporters of the bill, but they wanted to make sure that they weren't captured with their very, low gross receipts and, their very different impact, lumped in with big tech in its context. So I think that the nature of the changes is helping it be more specific to Vermont. And of course, I think as we probably spoke about and others are going to speak about, this bill is both the one you have and the new amendment are an attempt to be responsive to the California case as well, so that, we're wording things more carefully and we're working with lawyers who have learned lessons from how big tech won that.
I'll just say, my colleague Marissa, I believe, is going to be speaking about the amendments. So I deliberately didn't talk about the amendments in my testimony. But to the senator's question, I think you'll soon hear about how the bill has been changed since the California law to address both legal concerns, but also to address ongoing consultations with stakeholders.
Well, I guess that goes to my next question is, in the event that the Vermont strike all, which we will see shortly, if that were adopted, would it suffer the same attack that the California law did under some of the same grounds? And if it were looked at by the Ninth Circuit, would it come up with the same result?
And you're welcome to invite Marissa to join you on screen, or, if you want her help to answer that question. Not that you need it, but to get her voice in before we hit maybe 10:15, which is when we should end it.
To the senator's question, I'll say this. There's no question that tech will try. The tech industry will try to attack any regulation that's adopted. That has been their modus operandi across the country. Now, whether it's successful, we believe that the amended bill is robust and it addresses some of the vulnerabilities that existed in the California legislation and provides further explanations where necessary. But I think that, Vermont is not, should not be shy to kind of back down from a fight, because the tech industry will try, but a lot of the argumentation that they will try has been tried in California, and we've developed, I think, the intellectual arguments to resist that. And there's a lot of people, I think, who've been thinking hard about this, and we would certainly make them available to support Vermont should it come to that.
Thank you so much. And we will go to Marissa Shea, I believe, who's our last witness on Zoom, and then we'll have Camille mention anything that wasn't addressed.
Good morning.
morning.
Thank you for having me here today, Chair and committee members. I'm Marissa Shea, and I'm speaking today on behalf of Five Rights US, a project in cooperation between Reset Tech and Five Rights Foundation. I'm gonna sort of take a step back from some of the, conversation around the questions that was just happening and sort of go through my overview of what the bill does. And then, after I think, give you some of that bigger picture, I'm happy to go, follow up on any of those questions and sort of dive back in to the conversation we're having with my colleague. So as you've heard this morning, the current digital ecosystem did not happen by chance. It's the result of big tech's intentional choices. These types of data practices and design choices have been incredibly lucrative for these companies, but they're not the only way. At its core, Senate Bill 289 is simple consumer protection. This bill is not the same as the bill currently being litigated in California. Rather, the Vermont Kids Code reflects lessons learned from California and the ongoing lawsuit. Input from numerous legal scholars as to how to strengthen it against legal attacks, and the unique needs of Vermont, as highlighted by Senator Ram Hinsdale in her opening and the conversation we just had. Senate Bill 289 focuses on privacy and data protection mandates, requiring companies to limit their collection and use of kids' data to what is necessary to provide the online product requested. It also requires companies to assess how their digital products use kids' personal data and to what extent these practices create risks for kids. Should the assessment reveal risk, companies must mitigate by modifying data use and the design of their products. This risk assessment model is not new. It's utilized by state privacy laws, including those in Virginia and Connecticut, laws that apply to many of the same entities that would be regulated by this code, and laws that are typically seen as pretty business friendly. You might hear, from TAC after this hearing saying that the risk assessment in this bill is different because it's tied to best interests of children, and that's too nebulous sort of a concept for these companies to meet. That's another way this bill differs from California. This bill contains a narrowly tailored definition for best interest that does not mandate the platform sort of go above and beyond to provide kids with the best online experience possible, because we agree that would be too subjective. Rather, it has been carefully defined to guard against well-established harms recognized for decades by our legal system. So specifically, covered entities cannot process children's data or design their online products in ways that would create a reasonable risk of material physical harm, severe emotional distress, financial harm, a highly offensive intrusion to the expectation of privacy, or in any way that would discriminate against kids based on a protected class. And so I know those are a lot of sort of legalese, but those are all these, sort of key terms that really have an established meaning for both these companies and for the AG, who would be the enforcement entity of this bill. Far from being a burden, we think this creates a standard that's really just sort of basic decency from how these companies are creating products that they're offering, to our kids. And as you've heard from other testimony, they're really just sort of essential to most people's day-to-day functioning at this point in our society. This bill also includes a right to cure for companies in substantial compliance because we want companies to focus on innovation within the bounds of this framework. We're really not trying to have, a system in place that's punitive, and have been, working with Senator Ram Hinsdale to ensure that, we're working alongside Vermont's business community and really creating something that works for them under her, leadership, and trying to understand, I think, the unique needs of Vermont as a state and how it may differ, from California and from the UK and also from sort of other parts of this country. What the First Amendment protects, content and speech, isn't regulated by this bill. In Senate Bill 289, the only reference to content is language that specifies children must remain able to actively search for and seek out specific information. This bill is not limited to social media because bad data practices and manipulative design are not limited to social media. It's not limited to sites directed at kids because for too long that framing has allowed companies to avoid oversight. Rather than limiting what kids can see, the data privacy protections and design requirements of the Kids Code should actually diversify the information seen by children and teens because companies will no longer be pigeonholing kids' interests and recommendations through manipulative design practices. Stronger default privacy settings and better data protection fosters an online environment where it's safer for all kids to grow, explore, and express themselves. And as I mentioned, we've seen this play out in Ireland and the United Kingdom. Many of these same companies have already been modifying their products for kids and teens in those countries and making business choices that consider the risk of harm their data practices and design present to kids and sort of making concrete changes that improve online experiences. And so a few examples of this is that, Snapchat now turns all accounts belonging to consumers under 18 to private by default. TikTok has turned off notifications after 10 p.m. for 16 and 17-year-olds and after 9 p.m. for 13 to 15-year-olds. YouTube has prohibited by default or severely restricted commenting on material posted by users under 18. Instagram now allows consumers to hide comments from specific users without that user being aware. TikTok and Meta have implemented restrictions on direct messaging, preventing unknown adults from reaching out to kids on their platforms. And so those, you're not going to read the text of the bill and see language that says specifically those things because we're really trying to sort of create guardrails and a framework that these innovative companies who understand their products better than the average consumer can sort of work within to redesign things in a way that are consumer friendly. I'd also just like to highlight that these types of changes do not prevent parents from making their own choices about what their kids can or cannot do online. Obviously, it's critical that families have sort of an involved role in how their kids interact with the online world. And what this bill is really trying to do is make the task before parents a bit less impossible because they're no longer up against manipulative designs and dangerous privacy practices, but rather can sort of look at these products with some of the same, understanding that, as mentioned earlier, we use when we're evaluating which car seat we want to buy for our kids. We're still making that consumer choice for which specific products we want and how we interact with them. But there's a sort of level set, of the playing field in terms of what type of protections are built into the products that consumers can, reasonably expect. In short, this is a reasonable, vetted bill that walks the line between online privacy and safety in a manner that will actually benefit kids and keep the internet available to all. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any specific questions or to, go into more detail on things. that have come up earlier. Whatever best serves the committee at this point, I'm happy to do.
Thank you. Senator Brock, did you have anything else from
I
the
did not.
lawsuit?
Thank you.
Question, Senator Bucky?
I know we have to be on the floor in 5 minutes.
Well,
Well,
20 minutes, but we should make our way.
we're supposed to be on 5 minutes. Anyway, I'm just curious, what is Five Rights? The company you, well,
Yeah, I know. We have a slightly misleading name because we don't actually have like 5 rights that we promote. That sort of stems, I think, from work that Baroness Kidron, who's our founder, was doing in the UK ahead of her work on the age appropriate design code over there. And the UK, the age appropriate design code is actually based on 15 standards. But we're still utilizing this name that I think predates some of that work. So
So-
Five Rights globally is sort of the international leader in online safety and privacy for kids.
Great. Yeah, I mean, thank you for reminding us again about the UK. It just, it reminds me that we've all been scared by TikTok and China stealing our information. And that's only possible, even if it were true, because, we're letting these companies take data in the first place that we don't think they should have. So this is really helpful expertise and we appreciate it and we'll stay in touch. And thanks for helping us work the bill in a way that is responsive to the lawsuits that are pending, but also Vermont. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Camille, any final words? Thanks for helping put this witness list together as well.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, and you should probably introduce yourself for the record. So, and you might be here more. So
Okay,
but be
sure.
we look for all of us.
My name is Camille Carlton. Thank you all for having me here today, for taking up this really, really important issue. I'm with the Center for Humane Technology. We're a nonprofit. And the founding of our nonprofit was actually led by folks who used to work in many of these big tech companies. And they worked with these companies, they saw the way that these products were designed, and they tried to change it from the inside. A lot of like what Francis happened. And because they couldn't change it from the inside, they left. And they said, we're gonna work on a nonprofit that actually moves the needle here. And so since we were founded, we've really looked at kind of policies that incentivize better design from the beginning. Because we want to preempt harm before it happens. And we know, as we heard from so many folks today, that the harms are real, that kids are experiencing them every single day. Juniper set us up so beautifully, that the harms are affecting development. Dr. Schumacher, thank you for that. And Josh Boland also about how it affects everyday kids and parents. And we just have seen for far too long that we see the harms happen and then we try and fix it after the fact. And so why we're such a proponent of a model like the Vermont Kids Code is because it changes the product design from inception. So before the product even hits the hands of kids, you have something that's safer. You have something that has privacy by default. And that model we think is great in the sense that it looks at consumer protection. It enables safe, responsible innovation, as Marissa said, allows companies to kind of, figure out the best way that they can do it. And so this is kind of our whole ethos. I can say on behalf of me and everyone who testified today, we're so grateful for your leadership on this. And we're so honored to be a part of this movement and we're here to help with whatever you need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect wrap up. We are on time and we are headed to the floor back on housing.